Welcome, everyone. On today's Do Now, I want you thinking about a war that's on the other side of the world in Ukraine, people who are under attack. Are you willing to help defend them? Would you be there? Would you be willing to actually go fight and help people? I wanted you thinking about wars that don't really impact the United States directly, that are on the other side of the world. Do you feel any responsibility for helping people? When you think one side is right, are you willing to risk anything yourself to help them? Because that's a lot of what Vietnam was about, right? We have this country on the other side of the world where the people are asking for our help. They want defense. Are we willing to do that? Today, we're going to be talking about Vietnam. We're going to look at the war itself and soldiers and what they experienced. So, here we have Vietnam. We got the North versus the South. This is a tough war because the United States' goal is not to win. Right? It's not like we're going to invade the North, we're going to conquer, and we're going to put things right. It was, we're going to defend the South against the North. And this is hard. How long does that take? How do you know if you're winning or not? When does it end? All right. So America's in South Vietnam trying to defend people. There's no way to know if you're actually winning this or accomplishing anything. All right. So there's a lot of war right here, but it wasn't about this line because North Vietnamese soldiers would go on what they call the Ho Chi Minh Trail. They go outside of Vietnamese borders, come back in, and start attacking anywhere in the South. Right? So it wasn't just defending one line. You had to defend the entire country at all times. There were a lot of people in South Vietnam who were North Vietnamese, or they supported the North Vietnamese. So even the people in South Vietnam were sometimes against the United States. And it put the U.S. in a weird position where you're trying to defend forever. So, like I said, today the goal is to really talk about the soldiers, what they experienced. Um, a lot of them were drafted, meaning they were given a notice by the federal government saying, you're in the military, come join, you're going to war. You didn't have a choice. If you didn't go, you'd be arrested. So a lot of guys were forced into this war, whether they liked it or not. These soldiers faced more combat time than any other American war, including Afghanistan and Iraq. Right? So the guys who actually were fighting this war spent more days in heavy combat than even World War II. Right? So it was really stressful on them. They didn't get much leave. It wasn't like a few months on, a few months off. They were there, and then they'd get like a couple weeks here and there. And this wasn't like World War II, where it's like you serve long enough, they send you home. The war's over, you go home. Right? This one had no end in sight, just fighting forever. Right? And that really affects soldiers' morale. Very difficult conditions. You're in a jungle, extremely hot. You can't see where anything is. There was lots of poisonous animals, lots of chemical weapons being used, and it caused a lot of problems. The soldiers themselves felt no reason to fight. They didn't feel like they were defending America or helping anybody. They just felt like they were just being sent randomly around the world to go fight people. The North Vietnamese army was very difficult to fight, but there's also this group called the Viet Cong, which was essentially a terrorist group. They would hide in the jungle and use a lot of booby traps and guerrilla warfare that the Americans, it was hard to find them. Plus, the Viet Cong didn't fight by the rules. Now, Americans believe that if you're fighting a war, you should be wearing a uniform. Designate yourself as a soldier. The Viet Cong would look like farmers. And as you came up to their village, they would look just like normal farmers. You turn your back and they would shoot and kill you. And then they would hide their weapon. And it was hard to know who you were fighting and who you weren't fighting against and who was on your side and who wasn't. And the tactics they were using, Americans just weren't ready for it. On top of that, America's allies, the South Vietnamese army, was not very helpful. They were not very supportive. Their army was terrible. Their government was terrible. They oppressed their own people. They were not good at fighting. And America was almost fighting the South Vietnamese people too, because they didn't really support the Americans. Right? So there's a lot of conflict between the American people and the Vietnamese people. On top of that, remember all the civil rights movement is going on. So there's going to be a lot of problems when it comes to African American soldiers, white soldiers, Hispanic soldiers, Asian soldiers. They're not going to get along very well. There's going to be a lot of conflict and disagreement, and It's going to make it harder for Americans to fight the war. Here's some pictures. A lot of the guys fighting, I mean, these aren't like grown men. A lot of them are 18, 19-year-old boys being sent to go fight. Here's some of those conditions you can see. You're in a jungle, lots of water, lots of rain, lots of heat, insects, disease, all that stuff. Um, there were a lot of use of helicopters, so Americans were constantly trying to jump around the country to find their enemies and destroy them, which was really difficult to do. There was a lot of chemical weapons being sprayed on places, so like something called Agent Orange. We'll watch a video on it, where they're trying to kill mosquitoes, destroy the plants, so it'd be easier to fight the war. It made it really difficult. Like I said, it was difficult to know who was on your side and who wasn't. All right, so there'd be Vietnamese people. You didn't know if they were trying to help you or trying to hurt you. And a lot of the people, men, women, children, elderly, everyone, if they were on the side of the Viet Cong, they would do whatever it took to attack Americans. All right, they were terrorist soldiers, so it made it really hard on Americans to know who to support and who not to. All right, so you got a lot of villages being burned, a lot of innocent people getting caught in the middle. This is a picture showing one of the top generals for the South Vietnamese right here, killing another soldier, killing someone being convicted of a crime. We're going to watch some videos about different issues around Vietnam, so you can pause this video. So when we talk about those soldiers, when they came home from war, they weren't welcomed as heroes. They didn't win the war. They didn't get parades or anything. They were treated almost as criminals. There's a lot of protests against the Vietnam War. There's a lot of people protesting the soldiers themselves. So there's a lot of PTSD. And then when guys got home, there was very little support to help them. A lot of homelessness, a lot of poverty. So today's activity, you're going to read a story about a Vietnam War soldier and explain some reasons why it would be difficult to be a soldier in this war.